Welcome to BTV, a series of videos designed to provide information on issues related to domestic relations, personal injury, and premises liability. The topic of this video is divorce, and I'm joined by Renee Boston from Boston Law Group. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question that I have to start off our conversation is Maryland a no-fault divorce state?
Well, actually, no fault typically means there's irreconcilable differences and no fault exists on either party. In essence, Maryland is not a traditional no-fault state. However, Maryland does have a fault grounds that's similar to being a no-fault state, meaning that in Maryland, if you separate with your spouse for at least a year, that will be enough to file for a divorce under the grounds of separation. So that would be still a grounds, but it's not fault, meaning it's not pointing the finger at either spouse.
And so once a couple decides to pursue a divorce, can both spouses decide that day to get a divorce and then have it granted soon, or is there a time period they have to wait?
In Maryland, there is a time frame. Maryland has a statutory period of time for each of the specific grounds for divorce. So unfortunately, in Maryland, you can't decide today that you want to separate and then go, first thing in the morning to file for a divorce. So you do have to wait that statutory period of time.
An unfortunate issue that we have to deal with is that sometimes women often suffer from domestic abuse.
Right.
And so I was wondering, is that a basis for divorce?
Actually, domestic abuse in and of itself is not. However, it can be part of the allegations regarding cruelty of treatment as well as excessive vicious conduct. So domestic abuse alone is not a grounds for divorce, but it can be used to couple with one of the other particular grounds for divorce.
You mentioned cruelty of treatment and excessive vicious conduct. What other grounds are there for divorce?
There are several in Maryland. For instance, adultery is one, and we've already talked about separation. Desertion is also one. In addition to the excessive vicious conduct and the cruelty of treatment, you also have insanity. A lot of people don't realize that, but if your spouse has been committed to a hospital and has been diagnosed as being insane, that's also a basis for divorce. And also incarceration too. If they've been incarcerated with a felony offense lasting for greater than 3 years, you could also petition the court for divorce. And I believe I've covered, so those are the main grounds for divorce in Maryland.
So once the grounds for divorce have been established and the statutory time frame has been met, how long will it take to finalize a divorce?
Well, it actually depends on the parties to the divorce, because a divorce can be as quick as 30 days from the time the complaint is actually filed, but it can last as long as a year or two depending on how the couple are dealing with the division of assets, if there are any minor children involved. It really depends on if the couple is willing to work together to dispose of any other issues, any outstanding issues prior to going to court. So there's not really a set time frame on how long the divorce could actually take. It just really depends on the couple.
So would you suggest a settlement agreement or a negotiation with the soon-to-be ex?
I definitely would suggest that at all costs, mostly because it would help ease the divorce situation, meaning it could help expedite things greatly if both spouses are willing to just take the time to sit down with their attorneys if they're represented, which they should be, and kind of go through everything and negotiate everything up front before going into the court. If you're going to the court with an agreement in place, things run so much more smoothly, and the divorce can be finalized within a month.
And so then finally, this topic of divorce kind of hits kind of close to home for me. A friend and her husband separated, and he gave her an agreement to sign regarding their property. Should she sign it?
I would suggest anybody, any kind of agreement, especially where divorce is concerned, do not sign anything without being represented by an attorney, or at least running it by an attorney. Because at this time, if you and your spouse are divorcing for a reason, do you really think you should be putting that much trust in this person to sign whatever they give you? So my advice would be, don't sign anything until you actually have an opportunity to look over it yourself or have your attorney look over it.
So Renee, I have to ask you, Kim Kardashian, that 72 days being married and separation thing, Is that normal that people are able to get a divorce after 72 days?
And what they haven't told you is, from my understanding, I don't believe that divorce is final yet. Especially if they were here, we still have to meet those same grounds. So okay. 72 days are down in the marriage, you still got to be married to him for another year before you can officially get divorced, before you can actually file for divorce. Because you still have to meet the mandatory statutory requirements of the 12 months at least of separation. So, but that situation there, I mean, that is like a family law attorney's dream, because she's trying to obtain an annulment for whatever reason she wants to claim, and he wants a divorce. And I can see kind of why. And you know, even though we at Boston Law Group only represent women, I think in this case I would take his case, because he has a stronger argument for divorce based on her, I guess, would you say, like a fraudulent intent to marry. So I think that would be a good case. I think that's a case we all need to kind of pay attention to as far as what actually happens with that one.
And what happens with the wedding gifts once they are divorced? Well,
if they're actually divorced, it's like anything else. You split them. You decide who gets what. It's actually, in Maryland, we have what's called equitable distribution. But equitable doesn't necessarily mean equal. So, say for instance, you have, 50 gifts. You could divide them up 25 and 25, but that's not necessarily how they're divided. You can also go back to who bought it, the purpose of it, is it connected to something else, whose funds were used for it, and that's how those gifts can be used to divide up. And that's with any kind of property in Maryland when you divide up marital property. So, say for instance, his grandma bought X, Y, and Z for the home. Well, he can argue that, his grandmother bought that for his use while he's a part of this marriage. Now, she could also argue that grandma bought it for us as a marital unit, and then they start arguing over who gets what. So, the property distribution can get kind of tricky, but wedding gifts, I think half of the stuff she got anyway, as far as Kim Kardashian, so poor Chris.
Yeah. So, bringing it down to what us regular people can relate to, in the instance of a divorce where one of the spouses still has school loans, how does that play out?
Now, are you saying, for instance, married person A and B, one of the couple have loans?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, when you sign the loan paperwork, you sign it in your name. So the person who signs the loan paperwork, that is the person who is responsible for the student loan. So unfortunately, that's not marital property 50-50. However, there's always a however. Depending on how tricky you want to get with a divorce, you can make an argument that the use of the student loans was to aid in the marriage itself. So the marriage benefited from the student loans, from the education received from the student loans, and you can make an argument that the other party is responsible for a part of the student loan. So that's why family law is not as black and white or as cut and dry as people would think it is. So there's always a however with any case. But in general, because it's a contract, the person who signed it is the one who's responsible for it.
Okay. And then, we've seen the Judge Maybelline, I believe is her name, with the divorce court.
Oh, divorce court.
Is divorce court really like that? I want to know what to expect,
A divorce court in a real courthouse, other than one that's on TV with a lot of camera, it's not the same. Let me just, it ain't the same. So if you're expecting, the yelling out of what happened and the yelling out accusations and bringing up people from the crowd to say he did this and she did this and this happened and that happened, that's not how it happens in real life. Matter of fact, most divorce proceedings are not jury trials. They are bench trials heard before either a master or a judge. And those are the only people that hear the evidence and decide the case. It's usually just the parties themselves, the husband and wife, and their attorneys that are present in the courtroom that actually there throughout the proceedings. Witnesses are outside and they're brought in, but as far as being a courtroom full of people and yelling and screaming and, you're not the father and yes he is and, that's my baby dad, none of that goes on in real life.
Okay. And then lastly, I was just wondering, what should people wear what should women wear when they go in to court?
You know, I've become a little bit of a reality TV watcher. Mm-hmm. And there was actually an episode similar to this on the
Real Housewives.
Exactly.
Yes,
right.
Yes. And Phaedra was consulting, what was her name?
Sheree.
Sheree, on what she should wear. She wanted to wear her Chanel and Louis, but she said not to wear it, right?
Because Sheree was actually going to court to seek a modification of her child support. She wanted to hold her ex-husband, who was a former professional football player, in contempt for not paying his child support. She's saying she was, she's hurting. She doesn't have any money. She has these kids that she can't take care of because she doesn't have any money for the kids' basic needs. Well, it will look really silly to a judge if you're coming in there saying you don't have enough money for your kids' school or clothes or, for housing, and you've got a, $20,000 Birkin bag on your arm, or you're stepping out of a $200,000 car, or you've got a Chanel suit on, or, or your shoes have a shiny red bottom to them. People aren't crazy. You got to kind of scale it down a little bit. If you're a flashy kind of person, scale it down a little bit for court. Look presentable, look nice, but don't look like you're some highfalutin somebody. You be a regular person. A nice suit, black, blue, or maybe a brown, or maybe even a soft gray. Don't look like you're going to church. And I'll even give this one a shout out for the men. If your suit coat has more than 3 or maybe 4 buttons, don't put it on. Don't put it on. I've seen people looking like clowns, in essence. I've seen men in court with suits that button all the way down to the ankle. That's not appropriate for court. Keep it simple, and I think that way it appears to the court that you respect the process and you respect the court. So if you look respectful, you'll get respected.
Well, thank you so much again for sharing all that you've shared with us today on women's domestic issues. And I look forward to continuing to talk to you about other topics.
Thank you very much for having me. And also, you can find out more information about us at the Boston Law Group at our new website, which is www.bostonlawllc.com.